The thunder of hooves echoed through the valley as Willow Grant galloped for her life, the hem of her lavender dress fluttering wildly against her mare's flanks. Behind her, the thunderstorm that had been threatening all afternoon finally broke, sending sheets of rain cascading across the Nebraska plains. It was 1875, and Willow was running from more than just the weather. She glanced over her shoulder, relief washing over her when she confirmed her stepfather's men were no longer in pursuit. 3 days ago, she had fled the ranch that had been her prison for the past 2 years. 3 days of hiding, stealing moments of sleep in abandoned barns, and pushing forward toward Fort Kierney, where her late mother's friend resided her only hope for safety. Lightning flashed, illuminating the outline of a small cabin nestled among a copse of trees ahead. Her mare, exhausted and spooked by the thunder, nearly threw her as another bolt cracked across the sky. Willow leaned forward, whispering encouragements into the animal's ear as they approached the cabin. She dismounted shakily, her legs nearly buckling beneath her from exhaustion. The rain pelted her mercilessly as she led her horse to the small lean-to attached to the cabin. There was no sign of life inside, but smoke curled from the chimney, suggesting someone was home. Gathering her courage, she approached the door and knocked, her knuckles trembling against the rough wood. No answer. She knocked again, louder this time. The door swung open suddenly, revealing a tall man with broad shoulders, his face partially obscured by the shadow cast by his hat. He wore a faded denim shirt and dusty riding pants with a gun belt slung low on his hips. A cowboy, clearly, and one who looked none too pleased at having a visitor during a storm. "What in tarnation are you doing out in this weather, miss?" His voice was deep, with a slight drawl that marked him as not being a Nebraska native. "Please," Willow said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I need shelter, just until the storm passes." The man studied her for a moment, taking in her soaked dress, her wild auburn hair plastered to her pale face, and the fear in her emerald eyes. Something in his expression softened, and he stepped aside. "Come on in before you catch your death." Willow hesitated, suddenly aware of what she was doing entering the home of a strange man, miles from anywhere. Her stepfather's warnings about what happened to loose women echoed in her mind, though she knew they had been meant to keep her isolated and afraid. Still, caution was warranted. She started, then paused as another crash of thunder made her jump. "I won't harm you," the man said, seeming to read her thoughts. "You can have the chair by the fire. I'll see to your horse." As he stepped out into the rain, Willow made her decision and darted inside, grateful for the warmth that immediately embraced her. The cabin was small but neat, a single room with a stone fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, a small kitchenette, and a bed in the corner. A rifle hung above the mantel, and books were stacked beside the bed. She moved to the fire, extending her trembling hands toward the flames. A few minutes later, the door opened again, and the cowboy returned, rain dripping from his hat and coat. "Your mare is settled," he said, hanging his wet coat and hat on a peg by the door. Without them, she could see him clearly for the first time. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps mid-20s, with sandy brown hair and eyes the color of a summer sky. A faint scar ran along his jawline, but it did little to detract from his handsome features. "Thank you," she said, still standing tensely by the fire. "I'm Willow Grant." "Ethan Galloway," he replied with a slight nod. "You're a long way from anywhere, Miss Grant." "I'm heading to Fort Kierney," she said, deciding that a partial truth was safest. Ethan moved to the small stove and put a kettle on. "Fort Kierney's still a good 15 miles from here. You planning on traveling in the dark once this storm lets up?" Willow bit her lip, uncertain how to respond. The idea of continuing her journey at night was terrifying, but staying with this stranger seemed equally daunting. "You're running from something," he observed, his voice matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. Her head snapped up. "How did you— People don't ride alone in this territory unless they're running to something important or from something worse." He poured hot water into a cup and added a tea bag, then handed it to her. "Drink this. It'll warm you up." She accepted the cup cautiously, their fingers brushing momentarily. A jolt of something not quite fear but awareness shot through her. "I won't ask what you're running from," Ethan continued, stepping back. "Not my business, but you're welcome to wait out the storm here. I can sleep in the lean-to with the horses." "No," she said quickly. "I couldn't put you out of your home. I should leave once the rain stops." "To go where?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. "Fort Kierney in the middle of the night, not safe for anyone, especially not a woman alone." Willow stared into her tea, knowing he was right but still wary. She had heard stories about women who disappeared on the frontier, and while Ethan seemed decent, she had learned the hard way that appearances could be deceiving. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Ethan sat down at the table, keeping his distance as if sensing her discomfort. "My ma raised me to offer help when it's needed. Besides, I've been the stranger needing shelter before. It's how things work out here." Thunder boomed again, rattling the windows, and Willow flinched involuntarily, the tea sloshing in her cup. "You're safe here," Ethan said softly. "From the storm, at least." Something in his voice, a quiet sincerity, made her look up and meet his gaze. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe him. The storm raged through the night. Ethan had insisted she take the bed while he made a pallet for himself on the floor near the fire. Despite her exhaustion, Willow found sleep elusive, her mind racing with the events that had led her here. After her mother's death 2 years ago, her stepfather, Harold Blackstone, had revealed his true nature. What had once seemed like stern protectiveness transformed into possessive control. He monitored her every move, dismissed the ranch hands who showed her any kindness, and eventually declared his intention to marry her off to his business partner, a man 3 times her age with a reputation for cruelty to his previous wives. It was only when she discovered her mother's hidden letters, including one from a Mrs. Martha Wilson in Fort Kierney offering help should Willow ever need it, that she formulated her escape plan. She'd taken her mother's wedding ring, the small amount of money she had saved, and fled in the night. She must have eventually drifted off because she awoke with a start, a scream caught in her throat. In her nightmare, Harold had found her, his fingers digging into her arm as he dragged her back. "Miss Grant." Ethan's voice came from the darkness, concerned but not too close. "You're all right. You're safe." She sat up, breathing heavily, her eyes adjusting to the dim light of the dying fire. "I'm sorry, bad dream. No need for apologies." He moved to stoke the fire, adding another log. The flames illuminated his profile, strong and steady. "Storm's past, dawn's not far off." Willow pushed her hair from her face. "I should go as soon as it's light." "I'm heading to Fort Kierney myself," Ethan said casually. "If you'd like company on the road." She stiffened, suspicion flaring. "You just happen to be going there today?" Ethan turned to face her, his expression open. "I go every week to deliver mail and supplies. I'm what folks around here call a route rider, not quite a proper postman, but I keep the outlying homesteads connected." "Oh." Her cheeks warmed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry for doubting you." "No need," he said with a slight smile. "Caution serves you well out here." Willow considered her options. Traveling with someone who knew the territory would be safer, especially if her stepfather's men were still searching for her. Yet trusting a man she just met went against everything her instincts were telling her. As if sensing her dilemma, Ethan spoke again. "You don't have to decide right now. I'll make us some breakfast and you can think on it." He moved to the small kitchen area, giving her space. Willow watched him as he efficiently set about preparing a simple meal of biscuits and bacon. There was something about his deliberate movements, the way he kept a respectful distance, that gradually eased her tension. By the time they sat down to eat, Willow had made her decision. "I'd appreciate your escort to Fort Kierney, Mr. Galloway, if the offer still stands." "Ethan," he corrected with a nod. "And it does." They set out as the sun crested the horizon, casting long shadows across the prairie. Ethan led the way, his horse a sturdy bay gelding setting a comfortable pace for Willow's tired mare. The air was fresh after the storm, and wildflowers dotted the landscape, their bright colors vivid against the green grass. For the first hour, they rode in companionable silence, with Ethan occasionally pointing out landmarks or sharing brief anecdotes about the area. Willow found herself relaxing, drawn to his easy manner and quiet strength. "How long have you been a route rider?" she asked as they paused to water the horses at a small creek. "About 3 years now," Ethan replied, leaning against a tree. "After the war, I drifted for a while, tried my hand at ranching, but it didn't suit me. I like being on the move, seeing different faces." "The war," Willow studied him with new interest. "You fought," a shadow crossed his face. "Union cavalry. I was young, too young, really. Lied about my age." "Is that where?" She gestured to the scar on his jaw before she could stop herself. "No," he said, touching it briefly. "That came later. Bar fight in Dodge City, not my proudest moment." There was something in his tone, a hint of regret, perhaps that made Willow want to know more, but she held her questions. Everyone had their secrets after all. As they continued their journey, Ethan shared stories of the people along his route, the Swedish family with 8 children, who always sent him off with fresh bread. The elderly widower who insisted on reading aloud any letters he received. The young schoolteacher who had come west, seeking adventure. "And what about you?" he asked eventually. "If you don't mind my asking, what takes you to Fort Kierney?" Willow hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. "I'm seeking a family friend. My mother. She passed 2 years ago and things at home became difficult." Ethan nodded, not pressing for details. "I'm sorry about your mother." "Thank you," she said softly. "She was everything to me, strong but gentle. She taught me to ride, to read, to stand up for myself." Her voice caught. "I think she would have wanted me to leave when I did." "Sounds like a remarkable woman," Ethan said, his voice warm. "She'd be proud of you making your own way." The sincerity in his words brought unexpected tears to Willow's eyes, which she quickly blinked away. They stopped for a brief lunch of jerky and dried apples from Ethan's saddlebags. As they sat beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree, a distant plume of dust caught Willow's attention. Her heart raced as she watched 3 riders approaching from the direction they had come. "Ethan," she said, her voice tight with fear. "Those riders." He followed her gaze, standing smoothly and moving to his horse. "Could be anyone. Ranchers, traders, but no sense taking chances." He untied a rifle from his saddle. "Stay behind me." Willow scrambled to her feet, trembling as the riders drew closer. They were still too far to make out faces, but the purposeful way they rode suggested they weren't simply travelers. "Are they looking for you?" Ethan asked quietly. Willow nodded, unable to speak around the lump of fear in her throat. "All right," he said, his voice calm and steady. "There's a ravine about a quarter-mile ahead. We can lose them there, take a different route to Fort Kierney." They mounted quickly, Ethan leading the way at a brisk trot that wouldn't immediately alert the distant riders but would put distance between them. Willow's hands shook as she gripped the reins, her mind racing with horrifying scenarios of being dragged back to her stepfather. The ravine appeared ahead, a deep cut in the earth with a narrow trail winding down one side. Ethan guided them down carefully, the horses picking their way through loose rocks and scrub brush. At the bottom, a small stream trickled through, lined with trees and undergrowth that would provide cover. "We'll follow the water," Ethan said, his voice low. "It'll mask our tracks." They rode in the shallow stream, the water splashing around the horses' fetlocks. Willow glanced back nervously, but the high walls of the ravine blocked her view of the plain above. "You think they saw us?" she whispered. "Hard to say," Ethan replied, his eyes scanning the ridge. "But even if they did, they'll have to find a safe way down. This gives us a head start." They continued through the ravine for nearly an hour, the stream eventually widening and the walls dropping away as they emerged into a different stretch of prairie. Ethan led them toward a dense stand of trees in the distance. "We can rest the horses there," he said, "and figure out our next move." Inside the small forest, they dismounted in a clearing shielded from view. Willow sank to the ground, her legs weak from tension and fear. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I've dragged you into my troubles." Ethan secured the horses, then sat nearby close enough to offer comfort but maintaining a respectful distance. "Want to tell me who those men are?" Willow took a deep breath, deciding to trust him with the truth. "My stepfather's men. He wants me back. He arranged for me to marry his business partner, a cruel man who's buried 2 wives already." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I couldn't do it, I wouldn't." Ethan's jaw tightened. "No one should be forced into marriage. Your stepfather has no right." "He doesn't see it that way," she said bitterly. "To him, I'm property, something he inherited when my mother died." "Well, he's wrong," Ethan said firmly, "and we're going to make sure you reach Fort Kierney safely." The conviction in his voice wrapped around her like a protective cloak. For the first time in days, Willow felt hope taking root alongside her fear. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know why you're helping me, but thank you." Ethan's eyes met hers, blue and steady. "Some things are just plain wrong. Forcing a woman to marry against her will is one of them. I'd help anyone in your situation." They remained in the forest until dusk, Ethan occasionally scouting the perimeter to ensure they weren't being followed. As the sun began to set, he determined it was safe to continue their journey. "We'll take a different route," he explained, pointing northwest. "It's longer but less traveled. Should get us to Fort Kierney by mid-morning tomorrow." They rode through the twilight, the landscape bathed in purple shadows. Willow was exhausted, swaying slightly in the saddle as they continued on. Ethan noticed and called a halt near a small, sheltered hollow. "We'll rest here for a few hours," he said. "No fire tonight, I'm afraid." They ate a cold supper of the remaining jerky and shared Ethan's canteen. As the stars emerged overhead, brilliant in the clear night sky, Willow felt a curious peace settle over her despite the danger. "Tell me about Fort Kierney," she said, wrapping her shawl tighter around her shoulders as the night air cooled. "What's it like?" Ethan leaned back against his saddle. "It's grown a lot in recent years. Used to be just a military outpost protecting the Oregon Trail, but now there's a proper town around it. Stores, a hotel, even a schoolhouse. Good people, mostly. Some rough types pass through, but that's true anywhere." "And Mrs. Wilson, Martha Wilson." "Do you know her?" Ethan nodded. "The dressmaker. Widow with grown children back east, respected in town. She's kind-hearted, takes in strays now and then, people and animals alike." Relief washed over Willow. "That sounds like the woman my mother described. She'll help you," Ethan assured her. "And until you reach her, I'll keep you safe." Willow studied his face in the starlight, struck by the earnestness there. "Why are you really helping me, Ethan? The truth." He was quiet for a long moment. "I had a sister," he said finally, his voice soft. "Younger than me. While I was away fighting, she was. She was forced to marry a man much older, a family friend who'd helped when times were hard. By the time I returned home, she was gone, died in childbirth. His hands clenched into fists. I was too late to help her. I won't be too late again if I can help it. The raw pain in his voice touched something deep inside Willow. Without thinking, she reached out and placed her hand over his. "I'm so sorry about your sister." Ethan looked down at their hands, then back at her face. Something passed between them, understanding, connection, the recognition of shared pain. "We should get some rest," he said gently. "I'll take first watch." Willow nodded, reluctantly withdrawing her hand. She settled against her own saddle, exhaustion quickly pulling her toward sleep. "Ethan," she murmured, her eyes already closing. "Yes. I'm glad it was your cabin I found in the storm." The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was his smile, small but genuine. Willow woke to Ethan's hand on her shoulder, his touch light but urgent. "Riders," he whispered. "Coming this way." She sat up, instantly alert, her heart pounding. The sky was just beginning to lighten with pre-dawn gray. "How many?" she asked, keeping her voice low. "3, same ones from yesterday, I think." He helped her to her feet. "We need to move, quickly and quietly." They saddled the horses with practiced efficiency, neither speaking. Willow's hands trembled, but she forced herself to focus on each task. As they prepared to mount, hoofbeats sounded in the distance, growing louder. "Too late," Ethan muttered, reaching for his rifle. "Stay behind me." The riders appeared over the rise, 3 men, just as Willow had feared. She recognized them immediately, her stepfather's foreman, Tucker, and 2 ranch hands. Tucker's face split into a triumphant grin when he spotted her. "There you are, little lady," he called, slowing his horse to a walk as they approached. "Your pa's been mighty worried." "He's not my father," Willow said, her voice stronger than she felt. "And I'm not going back." Tucker's grin faltered, his eyes shifting to Ethan and the rifle in his hands. "This ain't your concern, mister. The girl's family is looking for her." "Seems to me the lady doesn't want to be found," Ethan replied evenly. "I suggest you turn around and head back the way you came." Tucker's hand moved to his holster. "I don't think you understand the situation. Mr. Blackstone pays me to bring his daughter home, and that's what I aim to do." "She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go," Ethan said, his rifle steady. 3 against 1 isn't great odds, but I guarantee at least one of you won't ride away from this if you try to take her." Tension crackled in the air as the men assessed each other. Willow's heart hammered in her chest, fear and determination warring within her. "I'd rather die than go back," she said, stepping forward to stand beside Ethan. "Tell my stepfather that. Tell him I know what he did to my mother. Tell him I found her letters." Tucker's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. The 2 ranch hands exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the standoff. "Tucker," one of them said, "maybe we should shut up." Tucker snapped, his face reddening. "I ain't going back empty-handed." In a flash, he drew his pistol. Ethan fired a warning shot that kicked up dirt at Tucker's horse's hooves, causing the animal to rear in fright. The other 2 men scrambled to control their own startled mounts. "Next one won't miss," Ethan said calmly. "Last chance to ride away." Tucker glared, but Willow could see the calculation in his eyes. Finally, he holstered his weapon. "This ain't over," he spat. "Blackstone won't let her go so easy." "Then he can come himself," Ethan replied. "Now go." The men wheeled their horses around and galloped away, dust billowing behind them. Willow released a shaky breath, her knees threatening to buckle beneath her. Ethan lowered his rifle, turning to her with concern. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her whole body trembled. "They'll be back." "With more men." "Then we need to reach Fort Kierney before they do," Ethan said, helping her mount. "It's only a few hours if we ride hard." They set off at a gallop, pushing the horses as much as they dared. Willow's mind raced with fears and questions. What had her mother's letters revealed? What secrets had her stepfather been keeping? And what would happen when they reached Fort Kierney? As the sun climbed higher, the landscape changed, becoming more settled. They passed farms and homesteads, the occasional wagon on the road. Finally, in the distance, the outline of Fort Kierney appeared, the American flag visible above the walls. "We made it," Willow breathed, relief washing over her. Ethan smiled, though his eyes remained vigilant, scanning the road behind them. "Not quite home yet, but close. Mrs. Wilson's shop is on the main street through town." As they approached the fort, Willow felt a curious mixture of hope and apprehension. What if Mrs. Wilson didn't remember her mother? What if she wouldn't help? What if her stepfather's influence reached even here? They rode through the gates, entering a bustling settlement that had grown around the military installation. Soldiers, settlers, and townspeople moved about their business. A few glanced curiously at them as they passed, but no one paid them special attention. Ethan led them down the main street, past a general store, a saloon, and a hotel, finally stopping before a neat building with a sign reading Wilson's Dressmaking and Alterations. "Here we are," he said, dismounting and offering a hand to help Willow down. She hesitated, suddenly frozen with uncertainty. Everything had happened so quickly: her escape, meeting Ethan, the chase, and now arrival at her destination. What came next, Willow? Ethan's voice was gentle. "Are you all right?" She looked down at him, at his outstretched hand and concerned eyes. In just 2 days, this man had risked his life for her, had shown her more kindness than she'd known in years. "I'm afraid," she confessed, her voice barely audible. "Of what?" he asked. "Everything. What happens next, if Mrs. Wilson will help, if my stepfather will find me?" She swallowed hard. "Of losing this, the first time I felt safe in so long." Understanding dawned in Ethan's eyes. He kept his hand extended, patient. "One step at a time. Let's meet Mrs. Wilson first." Willow nodded and placed her hand in his, allowing him to help her down from the horse. As her feet touched the ground, she found herself standing close to him, their hands still joined. "Ethan," she said softly, looking up into his face, "thank you for everything." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a warmth that hadn't been there before. "You're welcome," he replied, his voice equally soft. The moment stretched between them, fragile and new. Then the shop door opened, and an elegant older woman with silver-streaked hair appeared, her eyes widening as she took in the pair standing before her shop. "Can I help you?" she asked, her gaze sharp and assessing. Willow stepped forward, her heart in her throat. "Are you Mrs. Martha Wilson?" "I'm Willow Grant, Elena Grant's daughter." Recognition and shock passed over the woman's face. "Elena's girl? Good heavens!" She moved quickly down the steps, taking Willow's hands in hers. "I've been waiting for you to come. Your mother wrote to me before she died, said you might need help someday." Tears sprang to Willow's eyes at this confirmation. "She told you about Harold, about what he was doing." Mrs. Wilson's face hardened. "Enough for me to know he's no good. Come inside, child. You're safe here." She glanced at Ethan. "And who might you be, young man?" "Ethan Galloway, madam. I help run the mail route through these parts. I helped Miss Grant reach town safely." Mrs. Wilson studied him for a moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied with what she saw. "Then you'd better come in too. Sounds like there's a story that needs telling." Inside the shop, which doubled as Mrs. Wilson's home, they sat at a kitchen table while Willow recounted her escape and journey. Mrs. Wilson's face grew increasingly grave as she listened. "Your mother suspected Harold had a hand in her illness," she said when Willow finished. "She couldn't prove it, but she feared for you if anything happened to her. That's why she wrote to me." He poisoned her, Willow whispered, horror washing over her. She believed so. She began saving evidence letters, financial documents showing money missing from the ranch, notes about her symptoms. She hid them for you to find when the time was right. Ethan's hand found Willow's under the table, offering silent support as she processed this devastating information. "What do I do now?" Willow asked, her voice small. Mrs. Wilson straightened, determination in her eyes. "First, you rest. Then we go to the sheriff with your mother's evidence." Harold Blackstone isn't the first man to think he can get away with murder out here, but the law has caught up with the frontier, even if some don't realize it yet. "He'll come looking for me," Willow said. "Let him." Ethan spoke up, his jaw set. "The fort has a whole company of soldiers, and every decent man in town will stand against him once they know what he's done." Mrs. Wilson nodded in agreement. "You're not alone anymore, my dear." The words washed over Willow like a balm, easing fears she'd carried for too long. She glanced at Ethan, finding strength in his steady presence. "Will you stay?" she asked him quietly. "At least until this is resolved." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, something new and fragile but filled with promise. "I'll stay," he said simply. Over the next 2 weeks, events unfolded with surprising speed. Willow presented her mother's evidence to the sheriff, who immediately sent telegrams to authorities in her hometown. Harold Blackstone was arrested trying to enter Fort Kierney with a group of armed men, charged with murder and fraud. Throughout it all, Ethan remained by Willow's side, a steady presence, offering support without demands. They fell into an easy rhythm, taking meals together, walking through town in the evenings, talking about everything and nothing. Mrs. Wilson watched their growing attachment with knowing eyes but said nothing. One evening, as sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Willow and Ethan walked along the banks of the river that ran near the fort. The legal proceedings against her stepfather were nearly complete, justice for her mother finally within reach. "What will you do now?" Ethan asked as they paused to watch the water flow past. "You'll have the ranch back once the courts settle everything." Willow considered the question. The ranch held too many painful memories: her mother's death, her years of virtual imprisonment. "I think I'll sell it," she said finally. "Start fresh somewhere new." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Any idea where?" She turned to look at him, gathering her courage. "I was thinking perhaps somewhere along a certain mail route, if the route rider wouldn't mind the company." A slow smile spread across Ethan's face, lighting his eyes. "I think he'd like that very much." Willow stepped closer, her heart pounding. "Ethan, when we first met, I was so afraid. Of everything, including you." "I know," he said softly. "I'm not afraid anymore." She reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. "You showed me what it means to be truly safe with someone." Ethan's free hand came up to gently touch her cheek. "Willow," he said, her name like a prayer on his lips. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she found him watching her with such tenderness it nearly took her breath away. "I think I'm falling in love with you," she whispered, the words both terrifying and freeing. His smile deepened. "I know I've already fallen in love with you." As the last rays of sunlight gilded the water, Ethan lowered his head and kissed her gentle at first, then with growing passion as Willow responded, her arms encircling his neck. When they finally parted, Willow rested her forehead against his, a smile curving her lips. "I never expected to find you," she murmured. "My storm shelter cowboy." Ethan chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her. "Fate has strange ways." "Indeed it does," she agreed, thinking of all the unlikely circumstances that had brought them together. 2 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Willow stood beside Ethan in Mrs. Wilson's parlor, as the local minister pronounced them husband and wife. The small gathering of friends, including the postmaster who had officially hired Ethan, the sheriff and his wife, and several townspeople who had helped during the difficult days of the trial, applauded as they sealed their vows with a kiss. With her stepfather serving a life sentence and her mother's ranch sold for a handsome sum, Willow had purchased a small property near Fort Kierney, a cozy cabin with enough land for horses and perhaps, someday, children. It sat conveniently along Ethan's mail route, allowing him to continue the work he loved while coming home to her each night. As they greeted their well-wishers, Mrs. Wilson approached with tears in her eyes. "Your mother would be so proud," she said, embracing Willow. "She always wanted you to find happiness." "I think she helped me find it," Willow replied, glancing at Ethan. "She led me here to you, to him." Later that evening, as they stood on the porch of their new home, watching the stars emerge in the vast Nebraska sky, Ethan wrapped his arms around Willow from behind, holding her close against the autumn chill. "Happy?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. She turned in his arms, reaching up to trace the scar along his jaw, a feature she now found endearing rather than intimidating. "More than I ever thought possible." His eyes, blue and bright with love, held hers. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night in my cabin?" Willow nodded, recalling her whispered confession. "I said I was afraid of you. And I said that you'd earn my trust," she finished, smiling up at him. "You did, you know, and my heart along with it." Ethan's answering smile was tender as he leaned down to kiss her. "Best bargain I ever made." As their life together unfolded, there would be challenges, harsh winters, difficult journeys, occasional troubles with outlaws along the mail route. But they faced each one together, the trust and love between them growing stronger with each passing day. And sometimes, on stormy nights when thunder rolled across the prairie, Willow would think back to that first desperate ride, the fear that had driven her, and the unexpected shelter she had found not just in a cabin, but in the heart of a man who had given her the greatest gift of all, the freedom to love without fear.